Next week, we're going to take a look at torture, and we have a very distinguished group of speakers coming in, who I've just lost, including Somchai Homlor, the human rights lawyer, and Ponpen Kongkajongkiet, who is the chair of Amnesty International in Thailand and a director of the Cross-Cultural Federation. Looking further ahead, next month on the 13th of September, we'll be taking a look at the mysterious disappearance of Jim Thompson, another one of the great whodunit mysteries of Southeast Asia, still not solved, 50 years ago. That's Dr. Llewellyn Liu Tulmin, who is coming to give a talk to us. An appeal, we've reorganized our Monday night films, and we're opening up the club to people who would like to screen films, documentaries. So it's a call to all filmmakers. If you've got something that you want to show that you think will appeal, or you think should be shown, then please contact us and help out. So it's going to be less of an art house film night, more documentaries and regional stuff. And so to this evening, if I could ask my distinguished speakers to join me. Tony, Ajahn, Adi, Rungrui. By a very odd coincidence, we are actually exactly 1 year on to the hour since the Erawan bombing, which happened, of course, just around the corner here, and killed 20 people. Bombings aren't that unusual in Thailand. We had bombings going on in 2006 at New Year, which killed 3 people. I think they wounded about 40. Very similar in some ways to what's just occurred on Mother's Day here, and unresolved. In fact, we have less of an idea what happened in 2006 than we do as to what happened last year at the Erawan. So anyway, we put together a panel tonight to talk about the latest incident and how it relates to the referendum which preceded it. I'd like to point out that we approached many others to speak, including people who have a different theory on who is behind the bombings. I'm not going to say who turned us down, but we did do our best to balance the panel. That said, we have an excellent panel. We have Pontep Herungket, who is the Vice President of the Thailand Tourism Council, and she's also a Managing Director of Destination Asia. For those of you who don't know, the Tourism Council exists as a private sector representative body. It comprises all the key associations in the Thai tourism industry, all the sectors, everybody from guides to inbound. And they deal with the government on all issues relating to tourism. We have Dr. Anuson Uno, Dean of Thammasat University's Faculty of Sociology and Anthropology, who graduated from the University of Washington, where his dissertation was on the South. He's one of the key leaders of the Networks of Academics for Civil Rights, which has been carrying out campaigns relating to the recent referendum. So he's been monitoring very closely the discontent down there, which is extremely relevant. We have a veteran journalist from the Associated Press in her younger days, Rung Rawi, Chalamsi Pinyarat, and she's now an independent analyst who has been monitoring the South and a PhD candidate at the Australian National University. She has a particular interest and expertise in violent conflicts. It doesn't sound very good when I say it like that. But anyway, but she has a very good understanding of the Malay Muslim South, and that dates right back to her career, which also included a spell at the Nation. And finally, we have Tony Davis, who's a Bangkok-based security analyst. Can I have a drink? Yeah. With James, what's it called? IHS now? Yeah. And Tony is a veteran Southeast Asian correspondent. He's also an expert on West Asia. He and I used to work together on Asia Week many years ago. Just one story about Tony and his Asia Week days. We used to have a 2-hour readers section at the front, and Tony had just emerged from about 6 months with the Mujahideen, and there was a picture of our correspondent with 50 other guys, all with beards and flat hats and jerkins, and there was no way you could tell where Tony was in this picture. Anyway, back to Thailand, and I thought we'd kick off with Kunadi Pontep to give us a feeling of what this means in terms of tourism, the blast, the impact. We always talk about Teflon Thailand. Kunadi, how bad is it?
Yeah. Sit down. Okay. Good evening. I have to say, I think thank God that it doesn't look that bad. I think you know better. I think all of you are news reporter and you are media yourself. You probably know it better than me. But for me, I've seen the figures from the arrival into Thailand, and then we have seen each day the arrival. It's like at the moment it's about 58,000 people, tourists that arriving into Thailand at the moment each day. So it's still it's a positive figure, and also like you have seen, there's no travel advisory that say don't come, right? There's just say be cautious, be caution where you are. I think so far there are about 22 countries that have given out travel advisory, but none of them mention that don't come. And then for myself, I run an inbound company, and at the moment I do have big groups in Phuket and also in Bangkok. And people, we told them what's going on, and then but it seems people, maybe I have to say they're more resilient and also know Thailand quite well nowadays, that these things happen and and then especially I think with all the proof and with the explosion, it showed that it's not connected to international terrorists. I think that's one thing that for us we have seen. And also many of you might have seen that it's the incident happened on Friday, and then on Friday evening all the associations, all the Thai private sector, we all talked together and we say we got to do something. So we talked to the Minister of Tourism, Minister Gopgan, and then we had a press conference. I think some of you were there at the tourism office near the National Stadium. That we have the minister, we have the permanent secretary, and we also have the tourist police, and then we have the private sector, 20 association. We were there, and we say we sort of make sure that we look after the tourists, and then we have the authorities, that we have the police, we have the soldiers, so on and so forth. But what we have are the people working in tourism industry, and altogether we have 3 million people working in tourism, and that is direct and indirect. Altogether is 10 million, and then all of us. Tourism is our bread and butter. At the moment, tourism represents, I would say, 18% of our GDP. We had last year 29.8 million tourists, and this year we expect to have about 32 to 33 million tourists into Thailand. Even though there are lots of Chinese, yes, it's something we have to admit, they're the ones traveling, but they come and it's the mean of foreign exchange. And at the moment, Thailand, I think with all the problem we have with, many countries don't agree with our military governments, trading is not the best. Export, and also with the world economy, export dropped so much. So what it's making money at the moment? Tourism. So that's why we have to nurture the tourists. the tourism industry, and that's why we were there and we say, with all our people, with all these 10 million people in the industry who are involved in tourism, we have to be out the ears and the eyes that really make sure that there is safety within the country. So that's what I have to say for the time being.
Okay. So let's move on to Ajahn Anuson and get some background on the referendum and the mood in the South.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm not an expert in terms of insurgency or something like this. But anyway, given that I've been involved in the referendum campaigns over the past few months, so I think probably I can contribute something to this event. Actually, I think after the incidents took place, like shortly after the incident took place, the operatives and those in the policy makers or something, they try to link the incidents to those who are upset with the result of the referendum, because in terms of time, because it's just only like 4 days after the referendum, right? And then things took place. And in addition to that, in the 7 provinces where the approval of the draft constitution, won the landslide, so it's like, so they can it's like the revenge of those who are, upset or who disagree with the result of the referendum. But anyway, if we, take a close look at, those who disapprove of the draft constitution, we will see, probably it's like it's not easy. Probably it's might be impossible to link the incidents to those who disapprove of the draft constitution. For example, if we take a look at the Northeast, where in terms of region, it's the only region in Thailand that that disapproval both the approval. But anyway, if we take a close look at that, we can see, in 2007, the disapproval is about 60% or something, whereas the approval is 30-something. But now we have the shifting in terms of the proportion between the disapproval and approval. The disapproval, decreased, to 50%, and when we have about almost 40%, for the approval. What does it mean? It means that, those who in the Northeast, in particular, the richer people, who, actually, are supposed to vote no, were supposed to disapprove of the Dutch constitution, but things change. Despite the fact that, so many people in the Pheu Thai party, ranging from Yingluck, to Jaturon, and so many people in, in the party, the reason why, they don't follow, the signal sent by the political leaders, is because they want their MPs, to get back into the ring. Because because if they have their representatives come back to the system, they at least they can gain advantage from that in terms of budget allocation or something like that. So probably that's might be better than the battle that you don't know when or how it will end. So to have their MPs back, on track as soon as possible. So it's a thing. So for these people, people in the Northeast who and for those in for those who disapprove of this draft constitution, they subscribed to the constitutional method, means parliamentary system, rather than violence. Although we have violent elements, in the red-shirt people, but just a small amount, and that's not the official policy of the red-shirt movement. And in particular, if we have people Nathu Wood, And also, Jatupan, also many people, in the red church, they don't subscribe to the violence. So it's like, it's like hardly, possible for those who, disapprove of, or even those who approve of, the draft constitution to resort to violence. Okay, then come back to like the other area that disapprove of the draft constitution, which is the three southernmost provinces. That's the difference, because if we take a look at what happened in 2007, about more than 70% of those in the deep south, they approved of the draft constitution. But for now, for this round, they disapprove of that, about 60% or something, and what makes the difference is that the articles 54 and article 67, 54 is about education and 57 is about religion, and these two things combined, to like create the things that those in the deep south, who mostly who are Muslims, cannot agree with that. But anyway, what happened is this: during the campaign period, there are people in particular, if we can name that, like those who like a BN or something, they try, to like try to tell people, to go to the to the voting station and to write something like Merdeka on the ballot rather than vote no or something like that. Like so you see like the ballots, that like cannot be counted because it was destroyed or write something on that. But anyway, given that so on the one hand you have like government officials in particular, the militaries, try to tell people to like approve of the draft constitution. But on the other hand, you have like people, who like resort to violence, like the BIN, tell people, to mark something, on that, to send the signal to the military that they don't accept the procedures, they don't accept the referendum procedures. But anyway, the result shown that, given the hard working of people in the religious circles and was in like religious education circles, they try a lot, they put a lot of effort in doing that. So the result, turned out to be that they they disapprove of the draft constitution. So it means that these people in the deep south, and in particular, those in the religions and education, circles, and plus those in the village, these people, they still think that constitution plus the parliamentary system, are still the channel through which they can realize, their dreams and their wish, and their aspiration, rather than to resorting to the violence. So, taken all together, I think it's like hardly impossible for people. I mean, like ordinary people, who like and in relation to the referendum, we'll use this, as like the way to, express their, disagreement with the government. So yeah. So like in conclusion, in terms of referendum, I don't think those who, disapprove or vote no, to the referendum, are behind the incidents. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Okay, Rungrawi, you want to talk about the peace dialogues as well, but firstly, we get to that later. Carry on.
Okay, thank you, Dominic, and thank you, FCCT, for inviting me to join this timely program. Today, I would like to talk about two main issues. First, I will talk about who are most very responsible for this bombing, and secondly, I will talk about if the insurgents are responsible for this bombing in the Upper South, what impacts does it make to the peace dialogue? It should be stressed that what I will say remains to be hypothesis. This is an informed guess based on my analysis of the pattern of the attacks forensic evidence file, and the broader knowledge of the Southern conflict, which I have gathered to my research for the past decade. The government should allow police and other relevant agencies to carry out the investigation independently and transparently and respect the rights of the accused, which seem hard now because what we hear that the suspect in the bombing will be tried in the military court, which make it difficult to guarantee fair trial. The government should not try to cover up or distort the fact for political gain. Such a aim would only worsen the security situation in the country and undermine Thailand's credibility in the eyes of the international community. So who are the likely perpetrators for the recent attacks? In the article that I wrote in New Mandela, I give 2 reasons why I think this is likely to be carried out by the Southern insurgents. These people, they don't call themselves insurgents, by the way. They like to call themselves Juwer, which means fighter in the local Malay dialect. The first reason, the insurgents have previous record of carrying out bomb attacks outside their traditional theater of operation, which is Pattani, Yala, Narathiwat, and the 4 districts of Songkhla. If you remember the New Year's Eve bombing in Bangkok in 2006, 9 explosions went off in various locations, killing 3 people and injured more than 40 people. That took place a few months after the coup in 2006. The government at that time, the government of Surayut Julanon, also blamed Thaksin and his ally for being the mastermind of that bombing. According to my source, and also in the media report, including the Bangkok Post, police investigation team conclude that explosions were carried out by Southern insurgents. But the investigation was closed with no one being prosecuted. Then in December 2013, there were 2 bombings attempts, one in Phuket, another in Sadao. Military sources in the south admitted that they believe it was the BRN who were behind the 2 bombings. The one in Phuket did not explode, whereas the motorcycle and car bomb in Sadao went off, injuring 27 people. And the latest one, last year, there was a car bomb in Samui Island in April, which wounded 10 people. Again, the government was quick to blame the all-powerful clique, Amnat Kau, Kum Amnat Kau. When it was found that the car used to make car bomb at the Central Festival was stolen from Yaha district in Yala, then the theory started to shift to that these insurgents were paid by anti-government groups to plant the bombs, similar to what we hear right now. After that incident, 2 Malay Muslims were prosecuted in connection to that bombing. Surely they were innocent until proven guilty, but this could be one of the evidence that this could be linked to the insurgents. And according to police, 2 pickup trucks were used in the Samui operation were transformed into car bombs and used in the attacks during the Ramadan this year. One was used in the border tourist town of Sungai Kolok, and another one was used to attack the Kok Mokang security checkpoint in Songkhla. There was another bombing that the Pulo MKP has claimed responsibility. This probably went unnoticed. Not many people remember about it. There's a small bomb in front of a beauty shop in Ramkhamhaeng area in May 2013. At that time, the formalized peace dialogue was launched under the Yingluck government, and the Pulo MKP was not invited to join that dialogue, and it felt that it deserved a seat. That bombing was an attempt to get their voice heard. The Pulo MKP told me in a recent interview that that operation that they were responsible for that attack, and the operation did not happen as planned. The Pulo MKP had no intention to attack innocent civilians. And that was the only operation that carried out by the Pulo MKP outside the Deep South since 2004. By its own admission, they say that the BRN certainly has more military capability comparing to their own organization. The second reason is about the choice of target, which in my view is very much similar to the BRN strategies. They target tourist attraction, which are the major hub of economic activities. They target some nightlife area, which the insurgents consider as a hub of sinful activities. They also target places symbolizing the power of security force, such as the Office of the Marine Police and police station. The last reason, the pattern of the attacks and the type of explosive are also similar to what we have seen in the South for the past 12 years. Homemade bombs or improvised explosive device, which is a common type of bomb used in the South, were found used in these attacks. The insurgents also often launch coordinated attacks across the southernmost provinces. The linkages seem stronger when forensic evidence shows that the mobile phone used to trigger the bombs were all bought from Malaysia. It is an open secret that the insurgents used Malaysia as a safe haven. There are other evidence, as we heard in the media, such as DNA match with a suspect who lived in Narathiwat. All points to the direction that the perpetrators are likely to be from the Deep South. When it is hard to deny the involvement of those from the Deep South, the theory that this insurgent being hired by the anti-government groups is again being disseminated by the government and state authority, which I don't think that it has any ground. Why do I think it doesn't have any ground? The insurgents, to me, are ideologically driven, and they consider the Thai Buddhists as kafir, meaning infidel. So it would be a big sin for them to carry out an operation in exchange for monetary return from Thai Buddhists. For several years, the military has disseminated this idea that some insurgents are being hired by drug mafia in the South to carry out attacks, or they have worked together. This kind of discourse help to delegitimize the struggle of the Southern militants and depoliticize the conflict, making it look like they are just ordinary criminals. But based on my interview with many ex-insurgents and also my research and discussion with other independent analysts, such theory is groundless. So if this hypothesis is correct, that this might be the work of the insurgents from the South, what impact does it make to the military government strategies to resolve the conflict that now is already 12 years long? One thing I would like to urge is that the government should reconsider the peace dialogue, which now reaching an impasse because it did not endorse the TOR. To give you a bit of the background for those who have not followed the peace dialogue closely. So briefly on the background of the conflict, the Malay Muslim has fought for greater autonomy and independence since they were annexed to Thailand in 1909, and the last phase of the violent resistance started in the early 2000s, and the violence rise sharply since 2004. The Thai state never held any formal peace dialogue with the insurgents until 2013. During that time, Yingluck government initiated a peace dialogue and asked Malaysian government to facilitate. The government and the BRN representative met 4 times, but there was no tangible result. The talk collapsed after Yingluck dissolved the parliament. In 2014, after the coup, General Prayut went to Kuala Lumpur to discuss with Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, and both countries decided to resume the dialogue. Then after that, a new umbrella organization of the insurgent called Marapatani was formed. It comprised of several insurgent groups, including BIPP, GMIP, two factions of the Pulo. But the most important group, certainly the BRN, and that it is a controversial issue whether or not the BRN really take part in Marapatani. My take is that there are some BRN members who join, but they do not have official mandate from the BRN Leadership Council. Some may think that so there's no point to talk to Marapatani because BRN is actually not involved. But I just talked to a senior BRN leaders recently, and what he told me is that the senior leadership want to wait and see if the Thai government is serious about this. So far, the technical team of Party A, which represent the Thai government, and Party B, Marapatani, produced a draft TOR, which was expected to be endorsed by Party A in April this year. But the Party A refused to endorse it. Two major sticking points are that the government does not want the name of Marapatani to be mentioned in the TOR, and it is unwilling to guarantee protection from prosecution for Party B. Recently, the Party A sent a totally new draft with the name Marapatani removed, and there's no mention of any safeguard against prosecution if Party B travel to Thailand. And Party B is only defined as people with different opinions from the state. ผู้เห็นต่างจากรัฐ There's no mention of Marapatani in the document at all. So that's the background of the peace talk. We're still waiting what this government would do with the stalled peace dialogue. And this bombing probably gonna give some kind of push for the government to continue with the process. And I believe that the military has learned for the past 12 years that heavy-handed suppression is only counterproductive. And this might be a wake-up call for Bangkok to pay more serious attention to the peace dialogue again. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to sum up so far, we've had Konadi telling us about why tourism is so vital, very obviously, but significantly the impact hasn't been as bad as might have been expected. We've had Ajahn Anuson outline the changing opposition to the referendum so that it softened in the north and actually went positive, leaving us with the northeast actually against it, but softer than 2007, but much more pronounced opposition coming from the southern provinces. And then Rungrawee has just outlined what's been going on in terms of precedents and the peace process and the signals that may be being sent to the government. So let's move on now to Tony to give us his impression of what's happened and where we stand at the moment.
Good evening. Is that working? Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah,
okay, good. My impression is basically, after what's already been said, there's not a lot left to be said, frankly. And in terms of the insurgency, in terms of what's happened, in terms of the bombing, Kun Rungrawee's presentation was extremely comprehensive, and frankly, I've been studying this stuff for a long time, and there is, if I disagree with anything, it's nitpicking. So you've already got a pretty clear picture of what this looks like, both in sociological and political terms, in tourism terms, and in terms of the insurgency, which doesn't leave a lot for me to say, so I'm going to make this fairly brief. But I think what is worth saying is that this began on Thursday and then clearly gained momentum overnight on the Friday and continued into Friday. My own sense by Thursday night was very clearly that this was none other than BRN. That simple. And by Friday morning, I was getting calls from different news organizations in different countries, including, bizarrely, Turkey, who were interested in what was going on, and I gave them that opinion. And it hasn't been popular because basically, and I elaborated on that opinion on Saturday in a fairly lengthy interview with BBC Thai service, which naturally got a lot of traction in Thailand, in a way that perhaps interviews with foreign news agencies hadn't. So what I was saying was very unpopular at the top of the government. And I would be the first to say that it's very easy to sit back in an armchair and pontificate about, oh, it's obviously this or it's obviously that, when what needs to be done actually is hard forensic police work. And that obviously was being done. However, we live in the sort of world where news organizations demand comments, they demand, quote, expert opinion from people who are often not experts, and I don't think I have any special expertise in this area, particularly given what we've seen, which, in my opinion, was sort of common sense. To reach the conclusion that I've reached, and haven't changed in the last 3 or 4 days, it doesn't really require any great expertise. It simply requires a little bit of common sense and connecting dots. And maybe it's useful if I simply connect the dots that I connected in my own mind with you this evening. So my first question was, obviously, who could it have been? I didn't decide it was BRN simply because I have any particular interest in BRN. But at the end of the day, there were only 3 essential possibilities. One was Southern insurgents. The other, very clearly, was pro-Thaksin elements, be they connected to Pheu Party, be they UDD, whatever, who clearly had an interest in destabilizing and discrediting the NCPO government. And the third, which gathered a lot of traction in Thai social media, as I'm sure many of you are aware, was and is factions within the Thai military. So these were the 3, and still are the 3 possibilities. I didn't get too excited about Uyghurs. I was less excited even than by Uyghurs with the CIA. I sort of came down to combinations of these 3 or different versions of these 3 areas. Then it came down to a question of, obviously, intent, political interest on the one hand, and capability on the other. Now, you can argue that all of these 3 candidates have, to a greater or lesser degree, some interest, some political interest in doing what happened. But when it comes down to capability, within the first 2 or 3 minutes of my own sitting thinking about it, I took the red shirts and the UDD and Pheu right out of the picture. Why? Because several factors. One, we're talking about precisely the political group which, going back way before the coup of 2014, arguably since 2010 and the events in Bangkok then, before the coup of 2014 and intensively since the coup of 2014, this group has been under intense and pervasive military surveillance. Their phones are tapped, their meetings are known, their associates are followed, etc., etc. So you've got to ask yourself the question, is it credible that some group within this political grab bag could conceivably have organized, thought about it, planned, organized, and carried out a complicated operation across 7 provinces involving, in my assessment, not less than 30 operatives, maybe as many as 50, without the military getting one whiff of it? Doesn't make sense. It's nonsensical. then, I mean, look at red shirt capability. Let's assume, I mean, do they have any experience in this sort of thing? And the answer is clearly no. I mean, red shirt elements were involved, as we all know, in paramilitary violence in 2010. But do they actually have the capability to do what happened last weekend? In my opinion, the answer is very clearly no. So then you come down to the military, who certainly do, if they want, factions within the military have the capability to do what happened. But what's the political interest? And that's where I really have a big problem. The military conspiracy theory, the military plot has been argued in different ways, right? Anti-NCPO factions looking to discredit the NCPO after their referendum party, after the legitimacy they gained in the referendum. Okay, so that's one theory. Another theory is the NCPO itself with a view to establishing a clear need for its continued presence as a guarantor of law and order and cracking down on the opposition. And then a third theory is elements from other army regions who have been active in the south, who basically have been making a lot of money in the 3 southern provinces and don't want to go home. So what do? We set the south on fire and establish the fact that our presence in the deep south is desirable on an ongoing basis. And, you know, frankly, none of these arguments cut any ice in my book. None of this adds up in any logical way. Least of all, the NCPO itself, shooting itself in the foot, after they've received the endorsement they got with a referendum. Does it make any sense to start blowing up bits of Thailand and sabotaging the economy? It's nonsensical. And frankly, I don't believe there are any groups in any organized, we're talking organization here, there's no organized groups in the Royal Thai Army who have the desire to kill innocent Thai civilians and sabotage the army sabotage the economy for reasons which are frankly reasons of factional rivalry. I mean, an operation of this size, it just doesn't make any sense. And in the question and answer session, if any of you feel it does make sense, I'm sure we can talk about it further. So basically, I ruled out the army, not because of capability, but because of intent. So finally, you come down to southern insurgents. You've already heard what Kun Rungrawi had to say, and she made the case very well. BRN certainly has the capability. They've been doing exactly this. Nothing different. They've been doing exactly this, complex, coordinated operations using IEDs, using incendiary devices across 3 provinces for over a decade. They've been practicing for a decade, and they're very good at it. And never once has an operation been stalled in advance. In other words, their operational security has been remarkably good. Why? Simply because they are Malay. They are different. Culturally they're different, linguistically they're different, and BRN as an organization is particularly secretive in its organization and operations as a whole. So basically you have an organization which is already set up to do this. As Kun Rungrawi has already said, they've been out of the south, out of the 3 provinces before. They went to Phuket, didn't work out. They went to Samui, pretty effective operation. So tourism is not, this is not the first time they've touched tourist targets at all. What we have now is, instead of going to one spot with a big car bomb, they've gone back to what they're good at, which is dispersed operations, not that difficult to carry out if you have the organization and the experience and the manpower, small IEDs that can fit in a backpack or a briefcase, set by timers, so you don't have to be there when it goes off. You can, if you're using the alarm clock function of a telephone, you can set it 2 days, 3 days, up to a week in advance and go away, which is exactly what happened. So, in terms of their experience and their capability, it's a given. Why would they do this now? Why go, if you like, why press the nuclear button when they've been doing very well in the South for 13 years? I would argue there are 3 reasons. One is an immediate reason, and it goes back to what Ajahn Anusom was talking about earlier. It goes back straight to the referendum. What we saw in the first week of August was a dramatic is a word I don't like, but in this case it actually is applicable, it is appropriate. There was a dramatic increase in IED attacks across the 3 southern provinces. Not only IED attacks, but also graffiti scrawled across roads and on signposts saying basically, Thai referendum, Red Cross. In other words, BRN as an organization was against the referendum. From the word go, regardless of which way it was going to go. And I'm sure they knew that in their own bailiwick, in the 3 southern provinces and parts of Songkhla, it was going to go very much against the government. So then 4 days later, you have an operation, which is also, what I'm saying is, to me, it wasn't a coincidence that this massive operation happened 4 days after the referendum. They've been planning it, clearly, for months. I'm sure the reconnaissance took place over a period of months, certainly weeks before, but it was linked to the referendum. So that's one. That's the immediate factor. But I think there are 2 other very important factors. One is that the negotiations have been going nowhere. And I'm not going to go over what Kun Rungruwi has already laid out for you in very considerable detail and in my opinion, very accurately. All I would say, in addition, is that in October, they did what they've never done before, which is to put out a statement, a lengthy statement, and to give the first media interview they've given to an international audience, underscoring the fact that they are very unhappy with the current peace process, but they do want to negotiate. They're not against negotiations. They have one condition, and that is international mediation, which of course is anathema to any Thai government, regardless of whether it's military or civilian. The Thai standpoint on this has been consistently clear. This is an internal dispute, an internal conflict, and we don't need and we don't want and we're not going to countenance any sort of international intervention. So you have a problem. But BRN clearly has an interest in moving this issue forward. And the third point, why is BRN doing it now, is, in my opinion, relatively simple. And in my contact with BRN, not in this country I would add, but outside, this came across, not explicitly, but sort of implicitly in conversations. And that was, we are looking at a new a more politically sophisticated tack. Now that doesn't mean that they're going to give up on the military side, far from it. What it means, or what it, in my opinion, they didn't spell this out, but in my opinion what it meant is we are going to marry politics, our political ambitions and our military capability more closely together in a way that we haven't done before. And why now? Well, I guess that's the question that everybody who's interested in this has been focused on. Hey, this has been going on for 13 years. How long can they keep it up? Where are they going with this? Do they imagine they can do it for another 10, 13 years? And in my assessment, BRN leadership, maybe with some input, some prodding from younger guys in the, because a lot of the senior leadership, we're talking people in their 60s and 70s, right? And I think, and to a degree I know, there are younger cadres who are now saying, look guys, we've got to do something about this. We need to move this to another level in terms of negotiations, but also in terms of underscoring to our own support base and to the broader Malay Muslim community in the Deep South that we're on the job, we're moving this thing forward. We're not just going to let off bombs and kill innocent people, most of whom, of course, are Malay Muslims themselves, for another 10 years. So what we saw last weekend, in my assessment, was a fundamental watershed in this conflict. They've crossed the Rubicon. And that is, of course, very dangerous. And the reasons it's dangerous are pretty obvious. They are, in a sense, demanding that the Thai government respond to what's happened. And the history that Kun Rungroi spelt out very well is that to date the Thai government has preferred to not respond, to fudge over these issues. Maybe a bit of business conflict, or hiring a few people for the weekend, political influences, but basically not being prepared to bite the bullet. And the question now is, where will this go in terms of Bangkok's thinking? And what I certainly do not expect, and it would be remarkable if it happened, is that the NCPO, the government, is going to say, we got this wrong. Maybe it was BRN, right? They've already dug into a pretty comfortable place, which is, let's talk now about the UDD, but we're still talking politicians, right? They're in a comfortable place in the sense they've moved away from the UDD and Purtai, and they've moved south because the evidence is pointing south. So they've moved south, and they're saying it's politicians, Muslim politicians in the south, who have essentially hired insurgent elements for the weekend, right? That's where they're at now, and that is a tenable position. I don't believe it's an accurate position, but it's tenable because you are admitting the forensic evidence, which points to IEDs put together by southerners, by insurgents, but you are also staying with the political line. This isn't BRN, this is Muslim politicians with affiliations to Thaksin, da-da-da-da-da-da. So they're in a place where they can stay comfortably and wait until this goes away, as it will go away. Same with the Erawan event. It all went away eventually, everything goes away. So this may be where this particular issue finds its comfort zone and stays. However, if that happens, I'm personally worried because BRN hasn't crossed this Rubicon. They haven't made this strategic shift just to go home again. And if there is no progress in the coming months, we're not talking days or weeks, we're talking months. If there is no progress, then I can foresee this sort of thing happening again. I doubt it will be at the same level that we saw last weekend, which was pretty complex, pretty difficult to organize, 7 provinces, but is it possible that the same sort of devices could be used in 2 resorts in a couple of months' time? How do you stop it? It's almost inevitable. It's almost impossible to stop. So this can happen again. And in conclusion, I would say that there are ways out of this in which the NCPO, as I've suggested, is not going to say we got this wrong. BRN is likely behind this, and we need to recognize this. But there are back channels that they can use to get in touch with these people. And if that happens, then maybe the situation can be diffused. But if it doesn't happen, we're in new territory, and it's very dangerous territory. So that's all I'd say.
Thank you, Tony. Right, well, as usual, we have a microphone in the middle of the room. If you want to ask a question, please identify yourself. Please keep your question short and do not give a sermon. Thank you.
Chris Bruton, a member of this club. I'd like to ask the same question I've asked, I think, 2 other times in this room over the last 10 years. And that is, will there ever be a willingness on the part of the Bangkok government to acquiesce to some form of independence or autonomy for the southern provinces, the 3 southern provinces of Thailand? I always get the same answer, which I presume I will get again today, and that is no, the 3 southern provinces of Thailand love the Bangkok government, they love the Buddhist establishment, they would never agree to any kind of independence. The reason why the panelists give this answer is because, of course, there is a constitution off and on in Thailand, and the unity of Thailand as a country is always a constitutional requirement, and I suppose a military court would put you in jail if you answered anything different. But, you know, having said that, do you see any prospect for an amicable settlement on the 100 years of the injustice that was perpetrated by the British, of course, in not unifying the Sultanate of Patani in 1909, as was mentioned before? Thank you.
Ajahn Anuson, would you like to give a historical perspective on that?
Actually, thank you for the question. So I will like, you know, to draw to attention to like what happened in the Deep South, you know. If, you know, we take that the BRN is behind the incidents, what comes to my mind is that what, you know, what happened with, you know, their legitimacy among those in the South for now. Because if we take a look at, you know, what happened in the referendum in 2007, like we have like more than 70% of those in the South who approve of the constitution. And that's a moment, you know, that the incidents already took place for like at least 3 years already, you know. And for now, you know, because and now we have like more than 60% of those in the South, you know, disapprove of the referendum. So what happened with this is that, you know, it's not about the insurgency. That's, you know, shaped the way in which they decided, you know, in terms of the referendum for this. So it means to me is that, you know, it's estimated that about 20,000 voters in the South follow the instruction of the BRN, whereas, you know, the remaining of the voters didn't. So what it means is that, you know, although, you know, the BRN, you know, they has capability to stage violence, you know, but I don't think, you know, the means through which, you know, they try to have their, you know, right realized is not, you know, the one that, you know, have been approved by the those, you know, and in particular, I think those in the villages. Then, you know, if, you know, we take a look at, you know, the open letter of the organization called the Right and Freedom of Peoples in the Southern Border Provinces organization, you know, the last paragraph states that, you know, they still, you know, believe in the constitution, you know, means they still believe in the parliamentary systems, and then they, you know, like they like state clearly, quite clearly, that they don't support or condone the violence. So it means to me is this that, you know, but interestingly enough, the BN chose not to stage violence in the 3 provinces as the punishment of those who don't follow the instruction. But they chose, to stage violence in the provinces where the approval won the landslide victory. You have more than 70%, of the voters approved, of the referendum. So, to me, in the long run, it's hard, for the BRN who seems to resort to violence, to realize their autonomy or anything like that, But so it's it probably needs to come back to what people, and in particular, ordinary people, want in their daily life. According to, in addition to this, in addition to my involvement in the referendum campaigns, I've been doing research in the village of Raman district of Yala provinces for more than I started to do that in probably 7 or 8 years ago. And what I found in the village is that, probably, the thing that the movement try to promote or try to bring, them to, probably might not be the one that they want. Just I think it's not just the independence or the autonomy, in terms of that, but just just leave them, to carry out their daily life as the way they want to, regardless of, what you call the polity.
Ajahn, when you were doing your research in Yala and village level, did you get a feeling that the response might be like this, that something of this kind might happen if the referendum went against us? Was there anything that you were picking up at the village level?
Yeah. At the village level is that there's the difference between the 2007 and 2016 referendums. For the 2007 referendum, there is nothing, to to be related to the religion and educational issues.
What you said before.
Yeah, so
those
that's
2 articles.
Yeah, yes. And then for this time, it's quite, clear that there's religious rights and also educational rights are, restricted by the draft constitution. But more than that, 3 years, after 3 years of the operations of the military in the village, the effect was not severe enough. It's just that's the beginning of the, in my village, it took about 4 years after the, the resolution of the violence that you have the military camp stationed in the village. So it's they don't they're encountering with the military. It's not quite clear enough at the moment. But for now, it's more than 10 years past, and in particular in the village, they've been facing with the military operations for more than 5 or 6 years, 5 years or something like that, and then they feel they frankly speaking, they don't like the military, and they think of the referendum as part of the military operation to try to control Thailand, in the big picture, not only in that village or in the southern provinces.
All right, it's a groundswell of resentment. It's not just militants. Right, let's get some more questions.
Hi, Tiranai from Council English. I have a very, very naive question to ask. Basically, why were there no claims of responsibility for the attacks last week? And I thought the hallmark of terrorism was to get your message out, just like the ISIS or the Hamas, and they always claim responsibility and, send a message. But why were there no claim of responsibility at all when, in previous cases as well, in the last year bombing of Erawan Shrine, there was also just silence, there was no claim as well of responsibility.
Okay.
Is this some kind of a Thai thing? I mean,
all right, this is an interesting question. So, Rungrubi, what would you?
We can ask the same question for what have happened for the past 12 years as well, because there is no one who have claimed responsibility for any attacks in southern Thailand.
South was,
there is a history to it. because you know the insurgent they did not start the struggle in 2004. This has been going on for the past 50, 60 years, and it started, the armed movement started in 1960s. And they learned the lesson that, you know, every time they emerge in public, if they disclose themselves, then they're going to be cracked down, they're going to be abducted by the security force, they're going to be killed. And that happened, you know, with Haji Sulong. The disappearance of Haji Sulong is still very much a scar in the memory of the Malay Muslims. So I think it has to do with history, why they decided to carry out this kind of clandestine operations. Even amongst the, you know, their fellow movement, they also don't know exactly what the BRN was doing before 2004. I talked to people in Marapatani. They say they know that something's going on. They are doing something, but they don't really know the detail because it has been kept very secretive, even among themselves. Yeah, that's.
Okay, Tony, do you want to follow?
Yeah, I think there's another thing which is worth saying here. What Rungroi was saying, and she's quite right, is this culture, it's a culture of clandestinity, of secrecy, which BRN, I've studied various insurgent organizations. I've never come across an organization in which clandestinity, secrecy is so important as BRN. Essentially, as Kunrungari was saying, it's defensive, right? But it's also worth looking at it in terms of it has an offensive element. And what that does is to sow confusion. When you don't take responsibility, you sow confusion. And arguably, one of the best examples of this is when the insurgency started in January 2004, and I'm sure many people in this room remember it well, an arms raid in Jairong district, right, in which people took over a military barracks and walked away with over 400 firearms, mostly M16 assault rifles. And I can remember very clearly working in the south after that, and the word was out there, not just among villagers or even among only Thai people, but also among diplomats. You know, what we're hearing is this was the army. The army did this. And they did it because they'd been selling the weapons to the guys in Aceh in Indonesia, making a bit of money on the side, and then they knew there was an audit coming. So they had to stage this robbery to cover their tracks. It was the army that did it. Now, we look back 13 years later, and we know that was complete nonsense. But if you're looking at it from BRN's point of view, very successful operation, total operational security, walked away with 400 plus weapons, and left a trail of confusion, anger, disputes, which continued. So what do we see today? Same thing. A Thai political environment, a Thai political climate that is even more poison than before, because the NCPO is blaming the Reds. The Reds are saying, hey, wasn't us, must have been you guys. Everybody is blaming each other, and BRN is sitting there with a big grin on its face.
Right, question.
Follows on from that, Tony. What's the ultimate long-term advantage for the BRN in keeping this kind of state of chaos and no one knowing? Because at some point, doesn't it have to come out and say, we need to negotiate? And my question was just got to be, this reminds me a bit of the IRA's change of strategy. And you yourself mentioned a change of leadership, that when they went from being a terrorist organization to, in their own words, an Armalite in the ballot box. But is it new cadres, or are they also aware that they can get this with change within the political process? But balancing that, and this is the real question, aren't they looking at how the Constitution and the new Constitution made reform so much more hard to get through the political process?
No, my personal belief, and Ajahn Anusorn may well disagree, and you know, it's just a gut feeling. I don't believe this these events last weekend were specifically about the referendum. The Constitution was something they've made very clear they totally reject. They don't like it.